In 1995, in the heart of Monterrey, Mexico, inside a heavily guarded restaurant run by a retired but still influential cartel general, $13.4 million in cash disappeared in a single night. A fortress disguised as a dining hall with cameras, armed guards, and a safe that weighed more than half a ton had been breached. What seemed impossible became fact. Money earmarked for laundering cartel operations and military payouts evaporated. And for nearly 2 decades, no one knew who had dared to steal from one of the most feared men in the region. Before we dive deeper, remember, what you are about to hear is not just a crime story. It's about loyalty, corruption, and the patience of justice stretched across 17 years. Monterrey in the mid-1990s was a city vibrating with contradictions. Industrial wealth and cartel money ran side by side. The restaurant, El Horizonte, stood like an anomaly, its colonial-style facade painted white, terracotta roof tiles, manicured hedges at the entrance. At night it glowed with golden lamps and the sound of mariachi drifted out. But beneath the polished floorboards ran hidden wires, cameras connected to monitors in a back office, and a walk-in vault designed less for wine and more for currency. The General Miguel Ángel Barragán, age 61, once a decorated officer of the Mexican Army, later an intelligence coordinator for counter-narcotics, had transitioned into retirement by opening this restaurant. Yet everyone knew El Horizonte wasn't just for dining. It was a hub. Meetings with businessmen, payoffs for officials, a neutral ground for rival intermediaries. In the basement, 2 reinforced rooms, one lined with oak barrels of tequila for show, the other with a safe. The safe was a Rosengren Model 5400, imported illegally from Sweden, standing 4 feet high, 3 feet wide, weighing 900 pounds, secured by a dual mechanism, a mechanical combination dial and an electronic keypad requiring a secondary magnetic key. Each stack of cash was bound in bundles of $100 bills, packed into burlap sacks, each sack weighing nearly 20 kilograms. In total, $13.4 million occupied the core of that steel vault. The logic of storing it there was practical. Money for bribes, money for emergencies, money that couldn't be in a bank ledger. If you can't see it, they can't take it, Barragán once told a close associate, pacing his office with the heavy odor of cigars in the air. His office above the restaurant was sparse but imposing. Mahogany desk, leather armchair, maps of northern Mexico pinned to the wall, a clock ticking too loudly in the silence. Files stacked neatly, and in the corner, a faded Mexican flag. On the desk, 2 ashtrays, one clean, one overflowing. The procedures were rigid. Every night at closing, 2 men carried ledgers. One recorded the official restaurant books, another the shadow ledger. Security guards rotated in 12-hour shifts. Cameras covered every corridor. Tapes were logged and stored in labeled drawers. To enter the basement vault room, one required a steel key held by the general's deputy, plus a rotating code changed weekly, noted only in Barragán's black notebook. All of this meant one thing: no outsider could dream of entering without an insider. And there was one, Francisco Paco Jiménez, age 34, a quiet assistant manager, son of a baker, who had been given trust beyond his station. Paco had access to schedules, he handled supply deliveries, and most importantly, he knew the rhythms. When guards grew lax, when Barragán napped upstairs, when cameras occasionally blanked during power dips, Paco kept a diary, cheap blue notebook filled with shaky handwriting. In one entry later discovered, he scribbled, "I tell myself I'm loyal, but every time I count those bags, it feels like God is mocking me. Why them, not me? Why always their sons eating steak, while mine eat beans?" The organizer was someone outside, Javier El Zurdo Medina, a former military mechanic, dishonorably discharged after stealing fuel shipments. He had drifted into the criminal underworld, running small-time smuggling, but always dreaming of something bigger. Medina was methodical. He studied locks, alarm circuits, safe schematics. To him, the restaurant wasn't just a fortress, it was a challenge. He knew Paco from childhood. They had played soccer together in dusty Monterey alleys, and when they reunited at a roadside bar, Medina's pitch was simple: one night's work, and we'll never have to beg again. The third unexpected presence that night was Alejandro Ruiz, a 47-year-old electrician contracted by the restaurant weeks before. He lived across the street, in a yellow house with peeling paint. He had no role in the heist, no knowledge of the vault. But he had a habit: sitting on his porch late at night with a beer, watching the street. He would become the unexpected witness. General Barragan himself was a complex man. Strict posture, silver hair combed back, eyes that revealed calculation more than warmth. He had risen through the ranks during Mexico's turbulent 1970s, leading counterinsurgency operations, later liaising with U.S. advisors during anti-cartel campaigns. By 1995, he was officially retired, but unofficially he mediated between state forces and cartel leaders. At night, alone in his office, he often muttered, "If truth be told, I am tired of shadows. Every knock at the door feels like judgment." He trusted few, but with Paco he showed moments of softness, offering him cigars, asking about his children. Trust that would become betrayal. On the night of June 12, 1995, events began in increments. 1:48 a.m., Night Guard Morales logged his patrol in the hallway journal. 2:03, a delivery truck idled briefly near the back. Unusual at that hour, but Morales noted nothing. 2:12, the cameras in Corridor 3 flickered, as if power had dipped. Later, investigators would argue whether this was sabotage or coincidence. 2:19, Paco swiped his keycard, officially logging in for inventory review, though no such task was scheduled. 2:27, the keypad was pressed. Investigators reconstructed the sequence. 14 digits, entered without hesitation. At 2:31, the Rosengren safe opened. Inside, burlap sacks lined neatly, tagged with handwritten markers: OAX 01, Chi 07. 2:36, Medina and Paco loaded the first sacks into rolling trolleys. Each bag, 20 kilos, grunted under their lift. Medina had modified the trolleys with reinforced wheels to silence the creak. 2:45, they executed the substitution. In 3 sacks they placed weighted dummy bags, sand, and shredded paper to disguise the immediate weight loss. This was critical. If anyone checked the safe casually the next morning, it would not appear empty. Meanwhile, the ledger was altered. Paco wrote a false entry: Vault check 240, all intact. The minutes stretched. Medina timed each load. 90 seconds per sack. Transfer to the service elevator. Then to the back alley where a white Nissan van idled. He had disabled one external camera with a spray of black paint earlier that evening, disguised as graffiti. 3:04, the van doors shut with the last of the haul. Medina tapped Paco's shoulder. This is it. No turning back. But there was one thing they hadn't planned. Across the street, Alejandro Ruiz noticed the van. He jotted the license plate on a scrap of paper, thinking it odd for a delivery at that hour. He told himself he'd ask about it in the morning. He never threw that paper away. By dawn, the vault door stood closed, the ledgers neat, the restaurant calm. General Barragan arrived at 9 o'clock, descending into the basement with a cup of coffee steaming in his hand. He opened the safe for his routine inspection. His face froze. One bag split slightly at the seam, spilling not bills but sand and shredded newsprint onto the concrete floor. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Finally, he whispered, God help us. Fact block. According to internal police memos, the official loss was 13.4 million US dollars in cash, though rumors suggested additional undocumented sums were taken. FBI sources later confirmed U.S. bills from that theft resurfaced in circulation in Texas and Nevada within months. By noon, the restaurant was locked down, guards interrogated, phones ringing non-stop. Barragan lit cigar after cigar, leaving ash trails across his desk. He stared at the ledgers, then at Paco, who sweated but spoke calmly. "General, the cameras must have failed. We'll find them." Inside, his heartbeat raced. That evening, as investigators combed through the alley, a janitor found something in the trash near the general's house. A torn envelope. On it, in hurried writing, "If I am found dead, search the border hills." No one admitted writing it. No one ever explained how it ended there. And that was just the beginning. In the days after the theft, Monterey seemed unchanged on the surface. Cars honked in the morning rush. Families filled the plazas. Restaurants buzzed with music. But inside El Horizonte, the air was heavy, corridors echoing with whispered conversations, guards staring at the floor. General Miguel Ángel Barragan had built his reputation on control. Yet here he was, surrounded by unanswered questions, staring at a vault that should have been impregnable. Officially, the theft was treated as a robbery against a private business. Unofficially, every cop in Monterey knew the victim was no ordinary restaurateur. Files marked "sensitive" were created, stamped with red ink. Officers were warned to avoid leaks, but corruption in the force meant within 48 hours cartel affiliates knew exactly what was taken and from where. On June 13, 1995, the first task force meeting was convened at a military compound outside Monterey. Present were local police commanders, intelligence officers, and Barragan himself. A tall man in his 40s, Colonel Ernesto Velasco, chaired the discussion. His tone was sharp. This wasn't an outsider job. This was surgical. Somebody had codes, somebody had timing, somebody had courage. That points inward. Barragan remained quiet, puffing his cigar, smoke veiling his expression. His silence spoke louder than any outburst. Inside the room, eyes shifted toward Paco, the assistant manager. He was summoned and questioned for 6 hours straight. Every detail of his schedule was torn apart. What time he left home, why he returned at night, how he logged his entries. Paco had rehearsed. He leaned on routine. "General asked me to verify supplies. I saw nothing unusual." His answers were flat, rehearsed, but calm. Investigators noted no cracks. Still, suspicion lingered. At 21:15 that evening, tapes from the security cameras were finally reviewed. Strangely, Corridor 3's recording showed only static from 2:10 to 2:40, the critical half hour. The technicians swore the equipment was functional. Interference, maybe? One suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. This became the first documented anomaly. Police report, June 14, 1995. Camera 3 experienced unexplained blackout. Manual tampering not evident, yet probability of deliberate interference remains high. Meanwhile, across the street, Alejandro Ruiz, the electrician, noticed investigators taking photographs of the alley. He stayed silent, but inside his desk drawer, the scrap of paper with the Nissan van's license plate waited. He wasn't sure if showing it would help or condemn him. The investigation widened. Vehicles entering and exiting the block were cross-checked. Only official deliveries were logged. No record of a white Nissan. Another hole. By June 16th, Colonel Velasco requested reinforcement. Federal police analysts arrived, reviewing financial intelligence. Rumors spread. Was it an inside betrayal? Was it a rival cartel sending a message? Or worse, Was it a military faction punishing Barragan for his double life? Theories piled higher than evidence. In his diary, Paco wrote, "I feel them watching me, every step, every word. If they knew what I carried in my pocket last night, I'd already be gone." He meant the key, small, magnetic, disguised as a car alarm remote, still in his jacket. Medina, the organizer, had vanished into the sprawl of Monterey. Friends said he took a bus to Reynosa, others swore he drove south. No one confirmed. What investigators didn't know was that Medina had prepared months in advance. False ID, storage units rented under pseudonyms, money dispersed in parcels of $200,000, concealed inside industrial barrels. The van itself had been stripped for parts within 12 hours of the job, leaving nothing but a chassis in a junkyard outside Linares. Still, cracks appeared in the perfect plan. One of the dummy sacks filled with sand had torn too easily, raising immediate alarm. If not for that, discovery might have been delayed days. In the official reconstruction, the thieves had 27 minutes inside the vault. 27 minutes to move nearly 700 kilograms of currency. Experts were divided. Could two men lift that much so fast? Forensic analysts tested the timeline with weighted dummies. Their conclusion: possible, but only with mechanical assistance. Later whispers suggested Medina had used modified hand winches concealed in the trolleys. If true, he had planned every second. Twists emerged. First, an anonymous call on June 20th, 1995. A man's voice, distorted, claimed, "You'll find your general's fortune where the vultures circle." The line disconnected. Days later, police searched desert outskirts north of Monterey, but found nothing but animal bones. Second, a ledger discrepancy. Entries showed Barragan himself had visited the vault twice in the prior week, yet his personal agenda listed him in Mexico City at those times. Forged entries? Or was the general hiding movements? The implications spread suspicion upward. Third, Ruiz, the electrician, finally cracked. On June 23rd, he approached a detective, handing over the slip of paper. License plate, SRY 9423. The van. Investigators traced the plate to a vehicle registered to a shell company dissolved 3 years earlier. Dead end, but the mere presence of an eyewitness shifted dynamics. Ruiz became both asset and liability. He later told a journalist off-record, "I saw two shadows loading something heavy. One limped. That's all I know." The limp was key. Medina had once injured his ankle in military service. Suddenly, the faceless thief had shape. Still, arrests never came. Why? Because lines blurred. The task force operated under dual pressure. Solve the crime to preserve honor, and avoid exposing the general's ties to cartel funds. Reports were edited, names redacted, trails allowed to go cold. "We were chasing ghosts," one retired officer admitted years later. Behind closed doors, Barragan raged. He accused rivals of betrayal, threatened guards, demanded loyalty pledges. But in moments of solitude, he scribbled in his notebook, "If this money is gone, so is my shield. Without it, I am naked." By July 1995, the official investigation stalled. Medina was rumored in Texas. Paco remained untouched, his loyalty mask intact. Ruiz returned to his routine, though strange knocks at his door at night left him sleepless. He wrote letters to his brother. "If anything happens to me, remember the paper. Remember the shadows." One night in August, a fire broke out in the records room of Monterey's precinct. Hundreds of case files destroyed. Official cause, electrical fault. Unofficial suspicion, deliberate erasure. Among the lost documents, parts of the Horizonte file. A twist that sealed the silence. Years passed. The general aged, his hair whitening further, his temper shortening. The restaurant remained open, but whispers haunted every corner. Paco eventually resigned, citing family health. Medina remained a ghost, his name surfacing occasionally in border town rumors, tied to shipments, gambling dens, or nothing at all. But money has its own way of resurfacing. In 1998, bundles of U.S. bills with serial numbers linked to the Horizonte theft appeared in Las Vegas casinos. A tracer flagged them. The FBI quietly noted the connection, sharing with Mexican counterparts. But again, files disappeared. Who suppressed them remains unknown. By the early 2000s, the crime faded into legend. Young officers heard of it as a cautionary tale. The night even a general's fortress was breached. Yet the shadows never fully retreated. Because in 2012, 17 years later, a patrol unit in Tamaulipas stopped a van on a rural road. Inside, two men, one with gray hair, a limp. In the back, false panels, inside them $300,000 in aged bills, some marked from the Horizonte stash. That night, the silence of years broke. And for General Barragan, now near 80, the past roared back like a storm. But before that confrontation, before the arrests and the unraveling, there was still one unanswered question that investigators in 1995 never solved. Who left the envelope near the general's home with the warning, "If I am found dead, search the border hills"? Because hidden beneath that cryptic message was the seed of betrayal that not even Medina or Paco had anticipated. A secret pointing to a third hand in the heist, someone who had remained invisible for years. And that revelation was about to change everything. In 2012, with the sound of tires on gravel, headlights cutting through the dark rural road of Tamaulipas, a federal patrol had stopped what looked like an ordinary white van. Inside, the officers found two nervous men. One was Francisco Paco Jimenez, older now, face drawn with years of hiding, his hands trembling as he reached for documents. The other was Javier El Zurdo Medina, the man with the limp, the former military mechanic whose name had become a ghost in files long thought erased. In the back of the van, behind a false panel, lay bundles of U.S. currency wrapped in aged plastic. When sorted later, investigators confirmed serial numbers that tied directly to the 1995 Horizonte heist. The silence of 17 years had ended in a single traffic stop. The arrests made headlines quickly, but the truth that unfolded afterward was darker, more complicated than anyone imagined. Investigators reopened the old case. Files had to be reconstructed, witnesses re-interviewed, rumors dredged up from half-forgotten sources. For General Miguel Angel Barragan, now 78, it was an unwelcome resurrection. He had tried to bury the scandal under layers of business ventures, political alliances, and the quiet power of memory. But here it was again. Proof that the men who had humiliated him were alive. Proof that the money had not vanished into thin air. Journalists camped outside his gated home. Television anchors framed it as poetic justice. The general who thought he was untouchable now faces the ghosts of his past. Yet inside the security of his study, Barragan whispered to himself, "If they talk, I am finished." The interrogations began in September 2012. Paco cracked first. Under fluorescent lights in a federal compound, he slumped forward, eyes downcast, his voice hoarse from chain smoking. He admitted his role, the access codes, the falsified ledgers, the timing. He described how Medina orchestrated the logistics, how they moved sacks of cash in silence, how his own heart thundered when the safe opened. But he also revealed something investigators had never suspected, that a third player had been involved, someone neither of them fully trusted. "We weren't alone," Paco said, his voice almost a whisper. "There was someone else, someone who gave us the window. He controlled the cameras. He told us when the guards would look away. We never knew his name. Medina called him El Fantasma. The revelation set off alarms. Who was the ghost? Could he have been a corrupt official within the security apparatus? Or worse, someone even closer to Barragan than anyone imagined? Medina, more hardened, initially refused to speak. He sat with arms folded, his limp more pronounced after years of strain, his gaze locked on the one-way glass. You want names? He spat at the investigators. Look above you, not below. His cryptic words only deepened the mystery. Fact block. Federal records from 2012 indicate investigators identified anomalies in archived camera system logs from 1995. Some entries had been deleted at the server level, suggesting administrative access. The files were never recovered. As interrogation continued, twists emerged. First, Ruiz, the electrician who had witnessed the van in 1995, reappeared. Older, grayer, still living in the same yellow house. He stepped forward voluntarily when news broke of the arrests. I knew they'd come back, he told reporters. I kept the slip of paper with the plate number all these years. It was the only proof I had. His testimony was now undeniable evidence tying Medina and Paco to the crime. But Ruiz also revealed something chilling. In late 1995, a man he didn't recognize had come to his door, warning him to stay silent or the river will take you. He had obeyed, living under fear, never mentioning it until now. The shadow of El Fantasma loomed again. Second, financial traces emerged. Between 1996 and 2000, real estate in border towns had been purchased in cash through shell companies. Investigators now confirmed that at least some of those properties had been financed with Horizonte money. But when they tried to identify the owners, documents looped back to names of deceased men, ex-soldiers killed in accidents, or officials who had vanished. The money trail led nowhere concrete, only deeper into the swamp of corruption. Third, inside Barragan's private papers, seized under a quiet warrant, a journal entry surfaced. Written in 1997, it read, "If they knew the half of it, I'd be dead already. I was never supposed to keep it here. I was never supposed to hide what belonged to them. The hills are not empty. They hide more than bones." The note seemed to confirm that the money had not been his alone, but cartel funds entrusted to him for safekeeping. By losing it, he had not just suffered personal humiliation, but endangered his life. Twists continued to pile up. During trial preparation, Medina finally spoke at length. He admitted the heist had been planned with precision, but insisted, "We were only two men with guts. Someone else opened the door for us. Someone else wanted Barragan cut down." He described how camera blackouts and guard rotations had aligned too perfectly, how someone inside the military command structure must have orchestrated the blind spots. He suggested Barragan had enemies among his own, jealous officers who wanted him weakened. This raised a terrifying possibility that the Horizonte heist had not been just a theft, but a covert strike against Barragan's shadow empire, disguised as robbery. Archival note: Internal Defense Ministry memos, declassified in 2015, show that in the mid-1990s rival generals were investigated for illicit ties to competing cartels. None were ever charged, but suspicions ran deep. The trial of Medina and Paco began in late 2013. Courtrooms filled with journalists, survivors of 1990s cartel wars, and silent men in suits who watched without expression. Prosecutors presented the evidence: Ruiz's testimony, the van's recovered currency, the reconstructed timeline of June 12, 1995. But the defense strategy shocked observers. Medina's lawyer argued not denial, but context. Yes, my client took the money, but who owned that money? who kept it in a restaurant vault under armed guard. Was it legitimate? Or was it corruption feeding corruption? The courtroom buzzed. Judges frowned. Barragan, though not on trial, was dragged into the spotlight. Headlines asked, was the general victim or accomplice? Public trust eroded further. By December, verdicts came. Medina and Paco were sentenced, 40 years for organized theft, money laundering, and conspiracy. Yet even as they were led away in handcuffs, Medina smirked. "The ghost still walks," he muttered. No one ignored the statement. For Barragan, disgrace deepened. He withdrew from public life, his restaurant shuttered. Rumors swirled that he suffered threats from within the cartel. In 2014, his body was found in his study, gunshot wound to the head. Official ruling, suicide. But a note beside him read only, "They found me." Investigators never confirmed who they were. Ruiz, the electrician, gave one final interview before disappearing from public view. He said, "All these years, I thought it was two thieves stealing from a general. Now I know it was bigger. They weren't the only ones in that building that night. Shadows moved inside. Shadows that still move today." B-roll, archive photos of the restaurant facade, burned precinct records, courtroom sketches, old surveillance tapes. The white van stopped in Tamaulipas. Fact block. Of the original $13.4 million stolen, less than $2 million was ever recovered. The rest remains unaccounted for. U.S. authorities maintain that bills tied to the Horizonte case continue to surface sporadically in money seizures across Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. The story closed in tragedy and ambiguity. Two thieves behind bars, a general disgraced and dead, a witness silenced by fear, a nation reminded of the rot beneath its institutions. But the greatest mystery endures, the identity of El Fantasma. Was he a colonel seeking revenge, a federal officer on the cartel payroll, or a phantom invented to cover cracks in the thieves' own plan? No official answer was ever given. Yet whispers persist. Files redacted, names blacked out, unexplained deaths of mid-ranking officers in the years after the heist, all suggest a third hand guiding events. In Monterrey, El Horizonte no longer stands. The building was sold, demolished, replaced by a shopping plaza. Few remember its past. But at night, older men in bars still lean close and tell the story. How two men robbed a general, how millions vanished, how 17 years later justice arrived too late, and how a shadow, the ghost, may still be out there, guarding secrets worth more than money. The Horizonte heist remains one of Mexico's darkest unsolved chapters, not because of what was stolen, but because of what it revealed. That behind the walls of power and respectability, the lines between law, crime, and betrayal blur until truth itself becomes another casualty. And somewhere in the desert hills north of Monterrey, where vultures circle, some say the rest of the fortune still waits, buried in silence, guarded not by locks or safes, but by fear.